What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a discussion-oriented video about what to expect from me content-wise up to the lead-up of the launch of Baldur's Gate 3, as well as likely a little bit afterwards, in addition to my own plans for playing the game at launch, first character, that type of stuff. Following the final panel from Hell from Larian Studios clarifying a bunch of information, it was the right time to start ramping up content for this, which I have to say has done tremendously well, so truly thank you to everyone watching those videos. It's been a really great week for me. In making all of those videos, though, a few people had some questions and things that I'd like to answer here with this video, as this is going up Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday I have a few other things non-Baldur's Gate 3 related going on as far as coverage goes, but then we'll likely be right back to it. So probably the first and most important thing to mention is that there should be an incoming community update from Larian specifically. They have stated as much over on Twitter, or at least some of the devs have, that is aimed at clarifying a few things that were of course less than clear, such as the 72-hour early access period being one such example. And when that community update drops, I'll probably do a sort of off-cycle video talking about it. For those unaware, I upload pretty much every day at 6 a.m., or at least publish, I should say. But every once in a while, when time is of the essence, I will publish something more in the middle of the day. So that will likely be the case for that community update, provided, of course, that it actually shows up and answers a lot of pressing questions. Now, beyond that, content-wise, leading up to BG3, I would say I got the most important stuff out of the way very quickly. What you've seen up so far is very much so the stuff I wanted to talk about and overviews and things I wanted to make. From now until launch, I plan on covering the classes as a sort of overview video for each, talking about what to expect, how their mechanics work, and just a lot of in-depth information that if you're getting ready for the game and you want to play a particular class, would be useful to know, especially if you're not wildly familiar with D&D or you just haven't played a specific class in particular. The one potential exception to this is probably the monk, though. Monk, they mentioned, is getting some substantial reworks to make it more viable in-game, as in the tabletop version they're largely considered the weakest class, so I'm hesitant to cover that one without knowing exactly what changes they made, whereas the others, the changes are more common sense stuff and things I don't even necessarily need to mention in a video talking about them in an overview fashion, as stuff like that would be better reserved for builds where the actual math is more important. Now, once the game actually releases and I have the launch version in my hands, we can shift towards more specific content, things like builds, how individual systems work, like where to go to respec or anything, which is probably going to be with Withers, I would imagine, which is an NPC you can meet in early access. But once launch comes, I can focus on those more very specific things that require much more granular knowledge of exactly how they work in game. But that brings us to another important question for this channel, which is primarily a review channel, is that what is the review situation around this look like? I normally review games after 100%, and Baldur's Gate 3 is shaping up to be massive, so what's that going to be? Well, this is not the first time I've reviewed a massive game, even to 100%, but I imagine the closest analog to this will likely be Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. For those who have been around the channel for several years, you might remember that when that game launched, it actually took me several months to get the 100% review out. This is because that game is insanely large, and it took something like 500-600 hours. So with that in mind, I thought it would be good to mention exactly what I have in mind here and what that process will look like a little bit. Now, I would love to get a review copy for this game, as the earlier I can get started on this, the better. But I do want to mention here in this video, realistically, I am not expecting one. I did put in a formal request for a review key, but again, I'm just not expecting to get one, which is absolutely fine. I'm certainly not entitled to anything, and realistically, I've already paid for the game twice, early access and a collector's edition, so getting a review copy has certainly never stopped me from reviewing something I want to review. But in either case, with what is affected simply being the timing, my plans are to do a sort of initial review. That is to say, a review after completing the game once, followed by a review after 100% when I actually finish getting 100%, which could realistically take me months, and will likely be done alongside the act of reviewing and working on other games in the meantime. Again, exactly what happened with Wrath Path of the Righteous. So, assuming I don't get a review copy at all, and I'm messing around with the launch version for the first time at the same time it actually goes live, then you can expect a launch impressions video talking about all of the changes that I'll be experiencing myself for the first time, and what the initial impression of all those changes is when it comes to actually playing the game. Then, of course, I'll run through it, beat it for the first time, make an initial review talking about that experience so people don't have to wait for my full thoughts for potentially months before getting to work on the 100%. Pretty straightforward for the most part, but some people might want to know what is all going to go into the 100%, and I want to preface this by saying that I cannot plan perfectly until something is in my hands. I cannot account for things if I do not know they exist. So this is a rough outline of what I expect to happen, not necessarily exactly how it's going to go down. But in terms of numbers of playthroughs, things like that, at the absolute minimum, I'm expecting to play through the game with every single Origin character, with the Dark Urge character probably being my more custom playthrough. And then after that's done, which will already be 7 playthroughs in and of itself, individually, when I finish those playthroughs, loading old saves, of which I will have thousands by the time I'm done, I'm sure, parsing through all the sort of different interactions, major choices, where things branch, what each individual one does differently, and that's likely going to take me longer than the actual playthroughs themselves. But the first playthrough, which will again be with the Dark Urge, will simply be how I want to play the game. That's going to be all the decisions I would make for myself, how I would approach it, and that's what to expect from the initial review. But where it potentially gets more complicated is that Larian said there will be unique interactions based on your class. For instance, Warlock will be interacting with their patron in some manner, which, given that there's 3 different patrons, could be very interesting. And we will simply have to see what all that entails and how variable that actually is. Moreover, a question I have about this personally is that if you are multi-classing, do you get the interactions for both classes or just your main one, so to speak? Because given the free respecking they've confirmed, that leaves the door open for a lot of potentially very awkward interactions with classes and things like that. Because it should be possible to make a character that has all 12 classes, one for each level. Do I get the interactions for every class with a character like that? Things like that would be questions I have in relation to this, and because I simply don't know the answer, it's hard to gauge how many full playthroughs or playtime it's going to warrant figuring that out, but it is of course something I'm paying acute interest to. Though that, combined even further with all of the various reactivity and things you can get with your race and class combos and how substantial that winds up being and whether or not it's worth pursuing, will also factor in, for instance, a character going, wow, a Gith Druid isn't exactly going to add much to a review, but if there's more to it beyond just them reacting to it, then it might be worth my time to actually run down all of those interactions. All of that collectively leaves you with a minimum of at least 7 playthroughs just to see all the options with the Origin characters, and then with potentially further playthroughs dictated by whether or not saves coming my way through those playthroughs to check out various options and what they change in effect as I run through the game will then give me the necessary knowledge to go further. So even right now it's actually kind of hard to ballpark exactly how long this is going to take, but there are certainly worse things than getting to play my favorite genre of video games for a living and sinking hundreds of hours into one in particular at the same time. So that's kind of where my head is at as far as coverage goes, what the 100% is going to look like, what the plans for that are, on top of anything else I feel like doing for the game at the same time. But to end this video, people have often been asking what my own personal first playthrough is going to look like, and it will likely be a Tiefling Warlock with the Dark Urge Origin, as a Tiefling Warlock is my go-to in 5th edition D&D. Though depending on the exact state of multi-classing and how it actually feels to do so in-game, I'll likely mess around with that as well right off the bat, as their exact implementation of some of the Pact features for a Warlock, especially Pact of the Blade, will influence whether or not I want to multi-class into Paladin and do a lock-it-in, if only to see how it interacts with, again, the Dark Urge. But that's kind of what I have in mind for a first playthrough. Bare minimum, though, Tiefling Warlock all the way. That said, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Hope you found it informative. If you're looking forward to any of this, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, stick around, hang out to see it. The class videos are what you'll see first. I'll likely have the first one up Saturday. Though that said, if there's anything in particular you would like to see or have me cover or just want to mention, do remember to drop it down in the comment section below. But in the meantime, truly, thank you all for a tremendous week for the channel. It's been a blast covering all this and seeing all the updates and everything, so it is genuinely appreciated. But with that said, may you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.